Rose sat alone in the quiet of her small cabin, the weight of the world pressing down on her. The light from the small fire flickered on the walls, casting long shadows that made the room feel even smaller. Her husband had passed away 6 months ago, and the burden of raising 3 young children had fallen squarely on her shoulders. Life had been difficult for Rose, but it had always been manageable. That was until the day the storm came. The ranch had been a dream for her and her husband, built from the ground up with love and hard work. They had planned to leave it to their children, a legacy of their love for the land. But without her husband, the dream was slipping away. The barn needed repairs, the fence had holes in it, and the cattle were running low on feed. With no one to help, Rose had to take care of everything. She was worn out, her hands calloused, her back aching, and her mind constantly racing with thoughts of how to make ends meet. Her eldest child, Lucy, was doing her best to help, but she was just 12, and there was only so much she could do. The twins, Jack and Tommy, were both 7 and still needed a lot of attention. Rose did her best to keep them busy, but the weight of the ranch and the household chores was often too much for one person to handle. The days blurred into one another, with each one blending into the next. Rose had no time to grieve, no time to rest. Every day was about survival. The children had noticed their mother's exhaustion, but they didn't understand the extent of her struggles. Lucy, the oldest, would sometimes offer to help more, but Rose would always refuse, not wanting her to take on too much at such a young age. One evening, as Rose walked out to the well to fetch some water, she noticed the sky darkening earlier than usual. The air felt heavy, and the wind kicked up a dust storm in the distance. It looked like a storm was coming. She hurried back to the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in short gasps. As she reached the porch, she heard the distant sound of hooves. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but then the sound grew louder. Someone was coming. Her mind raced. Who would be out here in the middle of nowhere? There were no neighbors for miles, and her husband's old friends had all moved away. She stood on the porch, trying to peer through the growing darkness. As the figure grew closer, she could see a man on horseback, his silhouette outlined against the dark sky. Rose instinctively stepped back, her heart racing. She wasn't sure who this man was, but she could tell by the way he sat on his horse that he was no stranger to the land. The man reined in his horse and looked at Rose for a moment, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. His voice broke the silence. "Evening, ma'am. You doing all right out here?" Rose blinked, unsure of how to respond. It had been months since she had seen another soul. The loneliness was something she had grown accustomed to, but now, with the storm looming on the horizon, it seemed even more overwhelming. She swallowed her nerves and gave a small nod. "I'm fine," she replied, though she knew it wasn't true. "Just getting ready for the storm." The man nodded in understanding, his face softening. "Storm's coming in quick. I'd hate to see you out here alone when it hits. You got any place to stay safe?" Rose hesitated. She wasn't used to strangers, especially not ones who seemed to appear out of nowhere. But something in the man's voice made her lower her guard. "I've got the cabin," she said, gesturing behind her. "I'll be all right." The man studied her for a moment before speaking again. "It's getting dark and that storm looks fierce. If you don't mind, I'd like to make sure you're all right. The storm's only going to get worse, and you shouldn't be out here alone with those children." Rose was taken aback. Her children were inside, safe for now, but she could sense the urgency in the man's voice. There was no telling how bad the storm would be, and the thought of facing it alone made her uneasy. The man's offer to help felt like a small lifeline. "I appreciate the concern," she said slowly, "but I can manage." The man didn't seem convinced. He looked past her to the cabin, his gaze lingering on the dim light glowing from inside. "You sure? I'm just looking to help. I can give you a hand with anything you need. It's no trouble at all." For a moment, Rose stood still, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. She didn't know this man, and yet something about his calm demeanor made her believe he was trustworthy. Perhaps it was the way he spoke, or perhaps it was the sheer exhaustion in her bones that made her willing to trust a stranger. She finally nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "Come inside for a bit then. The children will be glad of the company." The man nodded and dismounted, tying his horse to a post near the porch. As they entered the cabin, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. Inside, her children were sitting around the fire, their faces lighting up with surprise at the sight of the stranger. Lucy was the first to speak. "Who's this, Mama?" "This is Nathaniel," Rose replied, smiling faintly. "He's just here to help us out for a bit." "The storm's coming." Nathaniel tipped his hat to the children. "Nice to meet you," he said warmly, his voice gentle as he made his way to the table. The children returned his greeting, and as they settled in, the cabin began to feel a little less lonely. The storm outside raged as they ate together, the wind howling and the rain pouring down in sheets. Rose had never been one to invite strangers into her home, but tonight it felt right. Nathaniel had brought with him not only his company, but also a sense of safety that had been missing from Rose's life for far too long. As the night grew darker and the storm intensified, Rose allowed herself to relax for the first time in what felt like forever. She knew the storm would pass, and perhaps with it, the cloud of uncertainty that had hung over her life. For tonight at least she wasn't alone, and for the first time in months she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might be a little brighter. The morning after the storm arrived clear and calm, with only a soft breeze brushing against the land. Rose woke up early as she always did, and stretched her tired limbs. The warmth of the morning sun through the small window made her feel a little more at ease. The night had been long, but with Nathaniel's company it had been bearable. For the first time in weeks she had slept through most of the night without waking up to the sound of the wind or the worry of what tomorrow would bring. As Rose got up to start her day, she noticed that Nathaniel had already risen. His boots were by the door, and there was the faint sound of his horse outside. She opened the door and stepped out to see him standing near the fence looking over the land. His figure was silhouetted by the light of the rising sun, and he seemed lost in thought, his hat low over his brow. "Good morning," Rose called softly as she stepped outside. Nathaniel turned toward her and gave a warm smile. "Morning, ma'am. I didn't want to wake you. I figured I'd take a look at your fence. The storm may have done some damage last night." Rose nodded. "Thank you. I've been meaning to get to it, but—" "I understand," Nathaniel interrupted, his tone understanding but firm. "You've got a lot on your plate. Let me help with that." Rose was taken aback by his kindness. It was rare to find someone who offered help without expecting anything in return. "You really don't have to," she started, but Nathaniel waved it off. "I don't mind at all," he said, walking over to the small barn. "I've been working with fences my whole life. Let me take care of it. You've got enough to handle with the children." Rose watched as Nathaniel worked. His hands were steady and sure as he repaired the damage the storm had caused. She couldn't help but admire how easily he seemed to handle the work. It was as though the ranch, this land that had become such a heavy weight on her shoulders, was second nature to him. Lucy and the twins joined Rose outside after a while, excited to see the stranger who had come to their home the night before. They were curious but polite, unsure of how to act around someone new. They had been isolated for so long, their lives revolving around the small world of their cabin, but Nathaniel seemed to know how to put them at ease. He knelt down to their level and greeted them with a smile. "Good morning, kids. How's everything today?" Lucy shyly nodded. "It's better now. The storm was scary last night." Nathaniel chuckled softly, standing up and brushing off his hands. "Storms can be like that. But I think we're all safe now, aren't we?" The children smiled, and for the first time in a long while, the cabin felt like a home again. Rose watched from a distance, feeling a warmth in her chest. Nathaniel had an easy way with her children, a way that made them feel comfortable and secure. It was something she hadn't realized they had been missing, someone who could offer them protection and care just like her husband used to. Over the next few days, Nathaniel continued to help with the ranch. He fixed the fence, tended to the livestock, and even offered advice on how to keep the animals healthy. Rose was reluctant at first, hesitant to rely on someone else, but she could see that Nathaniel wasn't going anywhere. He had taken it upon himself to help, and his presence brought a sense of calm to the household. As the week went on, Rose started to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The work she had been struggling to manage alone seemed more manageable with Nathaniel's help. She didn't have to carry the burden by herself anymore. There was someone here who cared, someone who wasn't asking for anything in return. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the land, Nathaniel and Rose found themselves sitting on the porch together. The children were inside, playing with toys they hadn't touched in weeks. It was quiet except for the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, Nathaniel looked over at Rose, his face serious yet gentle. "You've done well, Rose," he said, his voice low. "This place. It's tough, I know. But you've managed it for a long time." Rose looked out at the land, her heart heavy with thoughts of her husband. "I've done the best I can. But it's not the same without him." Nathaniel nodded, understanding. "It never is. But you're not alone now. You've got the kids, and now you've got me. If you ever need help, I'll be here." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Rose felt a lump form in her throat. She had been so used to doing everything on her own that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone else's support. "I appreciate it," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I really do, but I don't want to burden you with my troubles." Nathaniel shook his head, his eyes warm. "It's not a burden. It's just helping out a neighbor. We all need each other, Rose, don't forget that." His words felt like a promise, something that was more than just a fleeting kindness. It was a bond, something solid and real. Rose felt her chest tighten with emotion. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected to find someone who cared so deeply for her and her children, someone who would offer help without asking for anything in return. As the days passed, Rose began to open up more. She realized that Nathaniel wasn't just a man passing through. He was a man who genuinely cared for them. He spent time with the children, shared stories, and even taught them things their father would have. Rose found herself smiling more and even laughing, a sound that had been rare in the house since her husband's passing. One afternoon, as Nathaniel finished repairing the last of the broken fences, he looked at Rose and said, "You know, you've done something incredible here. You've kept this place going even when things were rough. You've shown your kids that no matter how hard life gets, you can keep going. That's something worth admiring." Rose felt a warm flush spread across her cheeks. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not for something as simple as surviving. But hearing Nathaniel's words made her feel seen, made her feel that everything she had been doing was worth it. The days turned into weeks, and soon, Rose realized that something had changed within her. The heaviness she had been carrying was lighter now. With Nathaniel's help and the support of the town, she had started to believe that things could get better. She no longer felt like the world was closing in on her. She was moving forward step by step. One evening, as she looked out at the horizon, she knew one thing for certain. Things were changing. And no matter what came next, she was ready for it.